At Fide.email, we believe in protecting your privacy and supporting your faith. Fide.email offers peace of mind with features like end-to-end encryption and secure communications tools. Your data stays private and your values remain intact. Choose an email provider that understands what matters to you. Make the switch to Fide.email today. You may have seen this clip floating around social media just before the Super Bowl. Catholics in the Philadelphia area were treated to a liturgical horror show, for no other better way to describe it, if their sense of the faith was functioning well. Pardon the language on the X post here. I can't really do anything about it, so I'll just scroll down here. But this is from tweeted out by Barstool's Philadelphia. So let's go here. I'm going to mute it because there's the people here are chanting. They're singing a song that's probably copyrighted, and what they're singing is the Philadelphia Eagles theme song at Mass. So we're going to mute that because of the copyright issue. But they are processing out while the handful of people at Mass are singing the Eagles song. The priest is dressed in a fine way, but look at him. Yeah, he's got he's turned his liturgical attire into a sports uniform. Look, I got nothing against priests and deacons and anybody else being very enthusiastic about their local sports team playing in a championship game. No problem with that whatsoever. It doesn't belong at Mass, though. It doesn't. It wasn't like anything else like that. It doesn't belong at Mass. And they were leading the laity and chanting their sports team's theme song. Now, this is kind of a part of a larger problem going on in the church where, you get the stories about Catholic Charities and USAID, and it shows that the end of the day, in every aspect of life in the church leadership, from Francis on down to your deacon at your parish, not at your parish specifically. You may have a very fine priest and a fine deacon, and God bless you if you do, and please pray that they stay the course. But overall, people have taken their eyes off our Lord on the cross. They've taken their eyes off of heaven and focus so much on the material that they celebrate sports and the material, and they focus on the corporal works of mercy, forgetting the gospel message, which shows you that there's an actual purpose to the corporal works of mercy. And they've turned that into the gospel, creating a better world, having a good time, accompanying people, dialogue and synodality and all this. And there's kind of an underlying thing about this. This is a weird story that broke over the weekend, and I really did want to share this with you because on the surface, it looks like it goes a long way to answer some questions. Headline from Gloria TV. Francis's mother didn't want him to become a priest. And when I first saw this, before I read this article, I was like, oh, maybe she sensed something. Maybe she was like, you don't have a vocation. Why do you want to be a priest? It's not that. That's not her reason. It turns out that Mama Bergoglio was an activist, the hammer and sickle variety. We're talking South America here. That shouldn't surprise anybody. The land of liberation theology, which was a problem in the church when the idea was planted there by the other side of the Iron Curtain in South and Central America back in like the 20s, 1920s. That's how far back it goes. Francis Jorge Mario Bergoglio entered the seminary in something like 1958 or something. Okay, he's been around a long time, and she didn't want him to go into seminary. But not for good reasons. This helps to explain a lot of what's going on in the church in the last decade. Quote, Francis's mother opposed his entry to the Jesuit novitiate in 1958, he said in a January 30th audience with seminarians from Valencia, Spain. The news was shared on Facebook by Bishop Jose Ignacio Munilla of Orejuela Alicante. One of the seminarians said that his mother hasn't accepted his decision to enter the seminary. Francis replied that he had experienced the same situation, Bishop Munilla recalled. His mother, although, or maybe because she was Catholic, was against Jorge Mario Bergoglio's vocation and did not want him to visit in the seminary. But finally, on the day of his priestly ordination, she knelt before her son and asked for his blessing. Francis' advice to the young seminarian was prayer, tenderness, and patience. As an aside, that's good advice. That is good advice. Again, Francis is very good at wrapping what he says, the erroneous things he says, in true things. And his advice here is absolutely perfect. as a Cardinal Bergoglio mentioned this episode in a 2004 book with journalists Sergio Rubin and Francesca Ambrogetti. According to that account, his mother, quote, became very angry, quoting Francis, in 2004. When I entered the seminary, my mother didn't come with me. She didn't want to go. For years, she didn't accept my decision. We didn't fight. It was just that I would come home, but she wouldn't go to the seminary, Cardinal Bergoglio said, end quote. No details about his mother there. So that makes her sound like, maybe gives people the inclination that maybe she kind of sensed something was off here. And that's not really what was going on here. You see, elsewhere here in the comment section, as this user in Gloria TV notes, he posts some screenshots here from an Alatea article in Spanish, and he translates them here. He says, quote, there's no evidence that Bergoglio had a priestly vocation. Quoting that Alatea article, quote, I come from a radical family. My grandfather was a radical in the 90s. 90s. Grandfather, meaning 1890s. Later in my adolescence, I also had an incursion into leftism, reading books on the Communist Party that my laboratory chief, Esther Balestrino de Caregia, gave me, a great woman who had previously been secretary of the Paraguayan February Revolutionary Party. Esther Balestrino de Caregia showed him, young Jorge, what political activism was like, and even introduced him to communist readings, which Bergoglio remembers precisely as he does her, whom he defines as extraordinary. End quote. So his grandfather was a radical in South American politics, or Italian politics, depending on when his family left Italy, going back to the 19th century. The apple does not fall far from the tree, as they say. And that goes a very long way to explaining everything that has happened. And I'm going to leave you with this thought here. If you want a good example of some of the radical things Francis has done, just look at some of the, there's a whole mountain of them, but look at some of the promotions he's done. And there is none worse here, possibly recently, than that of now Cardinal Radcliffe, the former papal household preacher who preached to popes going back to John Paul II. He gives us a perfect illustration of why Francis's family was his mother was weirdly correct about opposing his entry into seminary, despite her own probable personal radicalism. Because all the data we have here really shows that he has just a long history of making just bad decision after bad decision that purposely undermines the church. Like in this case, again, with whom he chooses to promote. So I'm going to show you here. You may have seen this floating around. I definitely saw this on X pretty much all day, all weekend. But this was shared by Michael Haynes, LifeSite News reporter. Maybe I'll refrain from playing the video because it gets a little spicy here. But he says, but there is video, and I'll have the links at returntotradition.org after this is over. You can go check it out for yourself if you don't believe me. He says in English that, quote, the challenge of talking about the synod is rather like talking about the marital act with somebody who's just getting to puberty. It's about how you're alive in a new way. And he goes on to talk about how he was young in the novitiate. And one of the monks there at the monastery he was at decided to give him the talk, the birds and bees talk. And he had no idea what he was talking about, saying he thought they were talking about Winston Churchill. I got a lot of questions. For instance, if you're of the age as a young man, teenager, or maybe a preteen, discerning a vocation of the priesthood, that's great. I mean, that's great. Your family did something right. Why was a monk talking to you about this? And the other, by that age, the parents should have handled that already. In fact, there is no universe where a priest should be trying to explain that to you, unless maybe in one scenario that I can think of. And that scenario is in an orphanage where there are no parents to do the explaining for them. This is the things to be left for the family. But then there's a more basic question. Why would Cardinal Radcliffe think it was a good idea in the aftermath of all the bad things that happened with McCarrick and priests like him that came out in the news 20 years ago and still seems to pop up in the news regularly? In what universe did he think this was a good idea as a topic of discussion? All of this speaks to a total and complete failure of bishops and priests from the top of the church all the way down to the laity to keep their eyes on the cross and on the saving message of Jesus Christ, to focus on the material. Talk about synodality a lot. Synodality is a false gospel. It's this inversion of the hierarchical pyramid of the church, where at the top of that pyramid is the vicar of Jesus Christ, the Pope, who rules the church in the name of Jesus Christ. At the bottom is the laity, and everything in between, from your cardinals to your deacons, your nuns, and everything else is in between that. Synodality is about inverting that pyramid and putting the laity at the top, which is an illusion, by the way. I've got a video later in the week for you on why that's an illusion. But it's a materialist false gospel because the entire purpose is to make people feel more welcome and to help create a better world. That's what synodality is about. That's how it's always invoked by these people. And at the heart of this is a rejection of the truth. And you see that in statements like that from Cardinal Radcliffe, who thinks it's a good idea to talk about to invoke the marital act as in an allegory about explaining synodality. It's bizarre. But that's the least bad thing he said. This is the same man who once described the parody of the marital act that the James Martin types espouse, that they're really interested in, that they sin that cries out to heaven for justice. He has described that also as Eucharistic. Pray for Cardinal Radcliffe's interior conversion. He's not a young man. I hope everybody prays for the bishops we talked about in these videos today, and please remember to pray for the church, because we are going to head into unequivocally rocky territory as things progress with this Catholic Charity story, USAID story, synodality, all of it. Unequivocally rocky territory. And it could be the fulfillment of the quasi-prophecy of then Father Joseph Ratzinger, who said a time was coming in the near future when the church would be smaller, poorer, smaller in number of Catholics, but it would be greater fervor, and that was when the renewal would begin. That sounds great until you realize the road there from here is going to be very rocky. So please pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.